There's a photograph on the mantle of my childhood home in Coral Gables that I used to stare at every single morning before school. It's a picture of my father, Dr. Thomas Pierce, standing in front of Emory University Hospital in his white coat, arms crossed, jaw set like granite, eyes looking directly into the camera like he was daring it to blink first. No smile, not even close, just that look, that specific, particular look that said, "I have arrived, and everything I touch will be great." I was 8 years old when I first understood what that photograph meant. Not for him, for us. It meant we didn't get to be kids. Not really. We got to be projects. My name is Leo Pierce. I'm the second son of Dr. Thomas Pierce and Margaret Pierce, née Calloway, who grew up in a 3-bedroom house in Decatur, Georgia, and somehow married into a legacy so heavy it could crush a grown man. I have 2 brothers, Ethan, the firstborn, 31 now, already a cardiovascular surgeon at Johns Hopkins, the crown jewel of my father's ambitions, and Lucas, the youngest, 22, currently grinding through his final year of mechanical engineering at Georgia Tech, quiet as a church mouse and twice as obedient. And then there's me, right in the middle, Leo, the difficult one. My father had a word for what I was. He used it so often it started to feel like my actual name, willful. He'd say it the way other parents said gifted or creative, with a slight edge of disappointment baked right into the syllables. Leo is willful, he'd tell relatives at Thanksgiving, while Ethan sat up straight and answered questions about pre-med, and Lucas nodded along to whatever anyone said. I'd be in the corner reading something I wasn't supposed to be reading, or taking apart the Wi-Fi router to see how the firmware worked, and Dad would just shake his head like I was a car pulling slightly to the left no matter how many times he got the wheels aligned.
We grew up in Coral Gables. If you don't know it, picture this. Wide, tree-lined streets canopied with banyan trees, Mediterranean-style homes with terracotta roofs and bougainvillea climbing the walls. The kind of neighborhood where the lawns are always perfect because nobody mows their own lawn. It's beautiful. It's also suffocating in a way that only money can make something suffocating. Because the beauty has conditions. You belong here only as long as you perform belonging correctly. My father performed it flawlessly. My mother performed it gracefully. Ethan performed it dutifully. Lucas performed it without question. I never quite learned the choreography. The plan for us, and there was always a plan printed in my father's mind like a constitution, was ironclad. Ethan would be a doctor. Ethan was already becoming a doctor. Lucas would be an engineer, following in the footsteps of our maternal grandfather, which gave the directive a kind of sentimentality that made it harder to argue with. And me, Leo, I was assigned law. Not asked, not consulted, assigned. My father sat me down the summer before my senior year of high school at the mahogany desk in his study and laid it out the way he might lay out a diagnosis for a patient. "You're sharp. You argue everything. You have the temperament," he said, not looking up from a document he was signing. "You'll go to Duke or Georgetown. You'll do well on the LSAT. You'll make partner somewhere by the time you're 30. That's the path." I remember sitting there, feeling the leather of the chair underneath my palms and thinking, that is not my life. But I was 17, and my father had a way of filling a room so completely that dissent felt physically impossible, like trying to breathe underwater. So I said, "Yes, sir." And I meant, watch me. Here's what nobody in my family knew about me, what I'd been hiding since I was 14 years old, building in the margins of every other expectation placed on me. I understood technology the way some people understand music, instinctively, viscerally. The logic of code felt like a language I'd been born already knowing. And the moment I wrote my first real program, a scrappy little inventory management tool I built for a neighbor's dry cleaning shop for $200 when I was 15, I felt something I'd never once felt sitting in the front pew of my father's imagined future for me. I felt like myself. I enrolled at the University of Miami in the fall, pre-law. That's what my father's tuition payments said. That's what the paperwork said. I even took 2 law courses freshman year just to keep the illusion breathing. But by the spring semester, I had quietly, carefully, surgically redirected my entire academic path toward computer science and artificial intelligence, double major. I found advisors who understood what I was building. I applied for and received a full merit scholarship that made my father's tuition payments unnecessary. I just kept cashing them into a separate account, building a runway. Dad never checked. Why would he? He'd handed down the plan. He trusted the plan. In his mind, the plan was the same as reality. In my mind, I was just getting started.
My dorm room junior year looked like what happens when a Radio Shack and a whiteboard factory have a chaotic, beautiful collision. 3 monitors, 2 laptops, index cards taped to every surface, algorithms, architecture maps, user flow diagrams. My roommate, a film major named Carter Webb, who is now, I should mention, my head of creative marketing, used to walk in, take one look at the organized chaos, and just quietly leave to sleep in his girlfriend's room. I didn't sleep much. I didn't need to. I was building. The idea had come to me sophomore year, sitting in a lecture about machine learning optimization. The professor was explaining how most enterprise AI tools were built for Fortune 500 companies. Massive, expensive, inaccessible to small and mid-sized businesses. I remember the exact moment the thought landed. What if you flipped the entire model? What if you built something modular, affordable, and intuitive enough that a woman running a boutique in Brickell could use the same caliber of AI-driven analytics as Goldman Sachs? I called it Next Layer. I won't bore you with the full technical architecture, but the core product was a plug-and-play AI business intelligence platform. You connected your existing data streams, your sales, your inventory, your customer behavior, your logistics, and NextLayer synthesized it into plain English strategic recommendations, updated in real time. Not a dashboard you needed a data scientist to interpret, a platform built for the person actually running the business. I built the first functional prototype in 7 weeks, alone, in that dorm room, on cold brew and granola bars, and the particular kind of electric focus that I now understand is what people mean when they talk about being called to something. Then I showed it to 2 people, Dr. Rachel Kim, an AI professor at who I'd been quietly impressing for 2 years, and Marcus Webb, no relation to Carter, a serial entrepreneur from Boca Raton who'd sold 2 SaaS companies before 40 and now mentored students he thought were worth his time. They both looked at what I'd built, looked at me, looked back at the prototype, and said almost the exact same thing in different words. This is real. We formed the company quietly, LLC in Delaware, standard startup structure. Dr. Kim became a technical advisor. Marcus became my first outside investor, a $300,000 check written on a Tuesday afternoon, which I stared at for so long my vision started to blur. We built a small, ferociously talented team. A back-end engineer I found in a hackathon at FSU, a UX designer who was finishing her MFA at RISD, Carter for marketing, and a sales lead named Angela Torres, who had the rare and devastating gift of making every person she spoke to feel like they were the only person in the world. We launched a private beta the spring of my junior year, 40 businesses. By the end of the semester, we had a 92% retention rate and 14 unsolicited referrals. Marcus said he hadn't seen numbers like that since his second company's Series A. By the fall of senior year, NextLayer had cleared its first $1 million in annual recurring revenue. By spring, we were at $12 million. We closed a Series A round in January of my senior year, $47 million from a venture firm out of San Francisco called Meridian. The valuation on the term sheet read $340 million. I was 22 years old. I was sitting in a conference room in Palo Alto in a blazer I'd bought the day before because I didn't own one, and the partners at Meridian were shaking my hand, and all I could think, the only thought that existed in my entire body in that moment, was Dad. I need to tell Dad. Because that's the part nobody tells you about building something extraordinary in secret. The loneliness of it is a specific, particular kind of ache. Every milestone I hit, every problem I solved, every morning I woke up and the platform was still running and growing and becoming real, there was a shadow over it. The shadow of a celebration I couldn't have. I couldn't call home and say, "Dad, we just closed a Series A." I couldn't put my real accomplishments on the family group chat beside Ethan's surgical certifications and Lucas's Dean's List notices. I had to sit with my victories alone, in quiet rooms, and tell myself that the right moment was coming. I was saving it, saving all of it,
for graduation. In my mind, I'd pictured it so many times that it started to feel like a memory rather than a plan. Graduation day, cap and gown, standing in front of my family with my degree in one hand, computer science and AI first in my class, and telling my father everything. The company, the valuation, the future I'd built for myself, and for him, and for all of us. I'd even done something else, something I'd told nobody, not even Carter, not even Marcus.
3 months before graduation, I put in an offer on a property in Star Island, Miami. 10 bedrooms, 12 bathrooms, 14,000 square feet on the water, with a dock, a pool, a guest house, and a view of Biscayne Bay that made you feel like God designed it specifically to remind you that beauty is real and it is possible. The asking price was $90 million. I made a full cash offer. I bought it for my family, for my father. I wanted to give him the house, walk him through the doors and say, "Look what your son built. Look what the willful one did." I wanted my mother to have mornings on that terrace with coffee, watching the water. I wanted my brothers to have rooms in a house that belonged to us, paid for, free and clear. No debt, no mortgage, just the clean and total fact of abundance. I wanted my father to feel just once, just for a moment, something he'd never once in my living memory allowed himself to feel about me. Pride. That was the dream I was carrying. That was the secret inside the secret. And then everything broke open at once. It was a Thursday in April, 3 weeks before graduation. I was home for a long weekend. Mom had asked me to come down. Something about a family dinner. Pierce's 62nd birthday, the usual choreography of Pierce family togetherness that we all showed up to and performed with varying degrees of authenticity. I'd been careful. I'd been so careful for 4 years, but careful has a shelf life, and mine had apparently expired. I found out later that Dad had run into Professor Allen, a law professor at old colleagues with someone at his hospital at a conference in Orlando. Somehow, in the casual way that a man's entire constructed world can come apart over canapes and cocktails, my name came up. Dad had mentioned proudly that I was finishing my final year of law, on track for a top 5 law school, the whole manufactured narrative. And Professor Allen, who had, of course, never had me as a student, had gotten a slightly confused look and said something like, "Leo Pierce? The CS kid? He's one of our brightest. I've seen his work through Dr. Kim." That's all it took. By the time I walked through the front door of the Coral Gables house that Thursday evening with a weekend bag over my shoulder and a birthday card in my jacket pocket, my father already knew. The house felt wrong the moment I stepped inside. There's a particular atmospheric pressure in a home when something bad has already happened but hasn't been said yet. A held breath quality to the air, a stillness in the rooms that has nothing to do with quiet and everything to do with waiting. Ethan was on the couch with a glass of water, not looking at me. Lucas was sitting at the kitchen counter staring at his phone with the focused attention of someone who desperately doesn't want to be present. My mother was standing near the kitchen doorway, and when she saw me, her eyes did something I hadn't seen them do in a very long time. They apologized. Leo. Just my name. Just that. And I knew. My father came out of his study. He was still in his work clothes, dress slacks, a button-down, sleeves rolled to the elbows. He had a printout in his hand. I could see from across the room that it was a transcript, my real transcript. CS, Artificial Intelligence, magna cum laude. He didn't yell right away. That was the terrifying part. He just stood there and looked at me with an expression I'd genuinely never seen on his face before, because it was an expression that required him to feel something he'd spent his entire life engineering out of his existence. He looked lost. And then the moment passed, and what replaced it was a fury so cold and structured that it was somehow worse than shouting. 4 years, he said. 4 years of tuition checks. 4 years of yes sir, law school, the path, the plan. 4 years of looking me in the eye at this dinner table and lying to my face. Dad, I need to explain. You lied. The word landed like a gavel. Not once, not a mistake, every semester, every phone call, every visit, a sustained, deliberate deception of this family. I was going to tell you. I have things to tell you, things I've been waiting to. Tell me what, Leo? He set the transcript on the coffee table like evidence in a case he'd already won. That you threw away the future I built for you. That you decided, as you always have decided, that what you want matters more than what this family needs, than what I know is right. I heard my mother say, "Thomas," quietly from the doorway. "Margaret," one word. She stopped. And I'm not proud of this, but it's the truth. I felt something crack open in my chest. Because the thing about having a speech prepared, a revelation rehearsed, a dream you've been curating for 4 years to offer someone, is that when the moment arrives and the context is all wrong, the words don't come. They just don't. You stand there holding this enormous, beautiful thing you built, and you can't find the door to bring it through. Dad, please, just let me talk for 5 minutes. What I've built, what I've actually been building, I don't want to hear it. He was already turning away. Computer science, applications, software. He said the words the way someone else might say hobby or waste. You threw away a legacy for a hobby, Leo, dressed it up in whatever language makes you feel brilliant, but that's what it is. You are brilliant, and you are reckless with it, and you always have been, and He stopped, pressed his fingers to his forehead. When he looked back at me, something in his face had calcified. "I am not doing this again," he said quietly. "I am not standing in this house and watching you unravel everything we've worked for one more time. You made your choice. You made it 4 years ago, and you have been lying about it ever since, and I will not." His voice dropped to something barely above a whisper that somehow carried more weight than any shout. "I will not have that in this house. Not tonight, not again. Get out." I heard my mother's sharp intake of breath. "Dad," that was Ethan from the couch. Even Ethan. I said, "Get out, Leo." I stood there for 5 more seconds. I counted them. I wanted to. I wanted to look at him, really look at him long enough to understand whether the man throwing me out was someone I should fight to reach or someone who'd made it permanent choice and called it principle. His eyes didn't waver. I picked up my bag. I walked to the door. I paused with my hand on the frame and I said, not angrily, I was surprised by how level my voice came out, "I love you, Dad. I've been trying to make you proud. That was always the whole point." He said nothing. I walked out into the warm April rain, and the door shut behind me with a quiet final click that felt louder than any slamming door I'd ever heard. I sat in my car in the driveway for a long moment. My phone buzzed. A text from Lucas. "I'm sorry, bro." A minute later, one from Ethan. "I'll talk to him. Don't go far." I looked at both of them for a long time, and then I set my phone on the passenger seat, started the engine, and drove. I slept in a hotel in Coconut Grove that night. A nice one. I could afford nice ones now, though it still felt strange to remember that without my father's permission. And I lay on top of the covers in my clothes for a long time, watching the rain move across the window and feeling something I couldn't name. Not anger. I want to be clear about that. I've thought about it many times since, trying to make sure I'm being honest with myself, and it was genuinely not anger. It was something older and heavier. It was grief. The grief of loving someone who has a specific, limited idea of who you're allowed to be, and the terrible understanding that their love, real as it is in its own constrained way, will always be conditional on your performance of the person they invented for you.
I thought about Ethan. Ethan, who is undeniably talented, who performs his surgical miracles with precise and genuine skill, but who called me 3 days before I came home and said in a low voice like he was confessing something, "Leo, I don't know how much longer I can do this. I wake up and I dread it every day." Ethan, who followed the plan perfectly and is quietly disappearing inside it. I thought about Lucas, 22 years old and already so compliant that I couldn't remember the last time he'd expressed a preference for anything,
A restaurant, a movie, a feeling. I thought about my mother, standing in that kitchen doorway with apology in her eyes. And then I stopped thinking about them and I thought about myself, which is something my father always framed as a character flaw, but which I was beginning to understand is actually just survival. I picked up my phone and called Marcus. He answered on the second ring, because Marcus Webb has the sleep schedule of someone powered by caffeine and ambition. "Leo, it's midnight. You okay? Can you meet me tomorrow morning? Star Island. I want to see the house." Pause. "You mean—" "I mean I want to go home," I said. "My home." He was quiet for a moment, and then he said softly, "Yeah, brother, I'll be there." I drove to Star Island the next morning under a sky that had been washed completely clean by the night's rain, the kind of Miami morning that makes you understand why people come here and never leave. All that pure blue overhead, the water in Biscayne Bay catching the early sun like a field of struck matches, the city glittering across the causeway like a promise that hasn't been broken yet. The gate to the property was a set of custom iron doors set into white stone, with the address etched in simple numerals on the post. I typed in the code the property manager had given me 3 months ago, the first and only time I'd come to sign the final papers, and the gate swung open with the slow, hydraulic certainty of something that knew it was impressive and didn't feel the need to hurry about it. I drove up the Palm Line Drive slowly.
The house came into view gradually, the way the best things in life tend to. Not all at once, but in revealing stages. Each turn of the driveway offering a new angle, a new detail, a new piece of the story. The main structure was white stucco and floor-to-ceiling glass. 3 stories, the architecture clean and modern without being cold. Something warm in the proportions, in the way the terraces stacked and opened onto each other like a conversation between levels. There was a fountain at the entrance that wasn't running yet, still in the quiet mode of a house waiting to be lived in. I parked and sat there for a moment. Marcus pulled up behind me 2 minutes later in his Tesla, and we walked to the front door together without saying much. The key, the actual physical key, large and satisfying in my palm, unlocked a door that was about 10 feet tall and opened into a foyer with marble floors and 20-foot ceilings and a staircase that curved upward like an architectural sigh. I walked through every room. I'd done it once before, at the signing, but that time I'd been in transaction mode, focused, evaluating, running numbers in my head. This time, I just walked. Through the chef's kitchen with its twin islands and the sub-zero refrigerators still sealed in their delivery plastic. Through the living rooms, plural, one for every kind of evening a person might want to have. Through the primary suite on the 3rd floor, where the terrace looks out over the bay, and the silence is so total and clean and feels like it costs extra. Down to the dock at the back of the property, where the water lapped quietly against the wood, and somewhere on the bay a boat was moving in the early morning distance. I stood there at the end of the dock for a long time. I'd bought this house to share it. I want to be clear about that too. I need you to understand that the grief of the night before wasn't just about my father rejecting me. It was about what that rejection cost. Because I hadn't built this life for myself alone. I'd built it with my hands full, arms extended, trying to offer it across a divide that my father had apparently decided was too principled to cross. But standing there on the dock with the water under me in the Miami morning doing what Miami mornings do, unfurling in that particular gold and blue way that makes the whole world feel temporarily like it was designed with generosity in mind, I felt the grief shift. Not disappear. It will not disappear. Some losses don't resolve. They just eventually stop being the first thing you feel in the morning, and you learn to carry them in a different part of your body, somewhere that doesn't slow you down quite as much. But it shifted. And what it shifted into was something harder to name and more important to keep.
It was ownership. Not of the house. I mean, yes, technically, Literally, my name was on the deed, one of the more surreal facts of my 22 years of life, but something bigger and older than property. Ownership of myself, of my choices, of the 4 years I spent building something real in the margins of someone else's plan for me, of every night I coded until 4 in the morning because the work was alive in me and I couldn't stop, of every conversation I had with investors and engineers and people who looked at what I was building and said, yes, this, more of this, people who were responding to the actual Leo Pierce, not the law school performance of him. My father once told me that greatness requires discipline, and he meant submission to structure, compliance with the predetermined path. But standing on that dock, I understood something he doesn't, that real discipline is the willingness to stay committed to your own vision when everyone, including the people you love most, including the person whose approval you've spent your entire life trying to win, is telling you you're wrong. I wasn't wrong. I wasn't wrong when I wrote my first program at 14. I wasn't wrong when I quietly changed my major with shaking hands and an almost physical sense of relief. I wasn't wrong when I looked at a problem nobody else was solving and said, I can do this. I will do this. I wasn't wrong when I bought this house and imagined my mother's face the first time she saw the water from the terrace. And I wasn't wrong to want my father's pride. That part wasn't weakness. That part was love. And love, even love that goes unreturned in the form you hoped for, is never something to be ashamed of. My phone buzzed. Angela, my head of sales, with a due diligence update from a potential acquirer, a conversation we weren't having publicly yet, a number we weren't ready to say out loud, but I looked at it there in the morning sun on my dock at my house on Star Island, and I let myself sit with the fact of it for a moment. NextLayer's current projected valuation, $90 million, the same number as the house beneath my feet. My 22-year-old self's particular brand of poetry, I suppose. Marcus came and stood beside me. He didn't say anything for a while, because Marcus is one of those rare people who understands the value of silence at the right moment. Then he said, "How are you?" I thought about my father, standing in the living room of the house I grew up in, holding a transcript like evidence of a crime. I thought about the door that closed. I thought about the 10-bedroom house behind me, still in its patient quiet, waiting for the noise of a life to fill it. I'm okay, I said. And then, more honestly, I will be. Because here is what I know now, standing on the other side of the hardest night of my life. I am not my father's plan for me. I never was. I am the thing that happened when I stopped waiting for permission and started building, quietly, stubbornly, faithfully, the life that was actually mine. He threw me out of a house I grew up in. He did not throw me out of myself. And the door to this house, this impossible, beautiful, mine and mine alone house on the water, opens with a key I earned. I earned it. And nobody, not even the man I love most, the man I've been trying to impress since I was 8 years old staring at a photograph on a mantel in Coral Gables, can take that from me. Not now, not ever. The water moved under the dock. The sun continued its unhurried rise, and Leo Pierce, the willful one, the difficult one, the second son, the one who wouldn't comply, stood in the morning with everything he'd built and let himself, for the first time in a very long time, take up exactly as much space as he deserved, which was all of it. The end.